diverse voices in the energy revolution. Here's your host, Amy Simpkins.
Welcome back to the Power Flow podcast. I'm your host, Amy Simpkins. Today I'm here with my friend and colleague, Julieta Giraldez, a leader in the renewable energy sector. Julieta is a principal of customer solutions at Kevala, where she focuses on solving the challenges facing energy market participants interacting with the evolving electricity grid. Prior to joining Kevala, Dr. Giraldez worked for the National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, where she led distributed energy resources grid integration related projects. Most recently, she focused on understanding how customer-sited resources such as solar, electric vehicles, and battery storage can best be leveraged and safely integrated into distribution systems. She brings a holistic view of grid integration related issues, acknowledging the importance of including multiple perspectives in the evaluation of new emerging technologies, from developers and customers to technology providers, regulators, and utilities. Dr. Giraldez holds a PhD in systems engineering from Colorado State University and an MS in electrical engineering from the Colorado School of Mines, and a bachelor's in technical mining and energy resources from the Polytechnic University of Madrid, Spain. Julieta, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Amy. It's great to be here.
I'm really excited for this conversation. I joke that I say that every time because I am really excited for every conversation. And so, and I can't stop saying it because I do feel that level of excitement with every conversation. But I am really excited to talk, especially as you have just made kind of a career transition. And so I want to start by saying, I just read your bio, which is one of my favorite things. I love reading other people's professional bios because it makes me just so automatically proud of you. But tell me from your perspective, what's your jam? What's your big passion in your work?
I think my big passion in my work is understanding people's struggles and trying to think of the best way to help them out. And so at NREL, in my previous job, we did that a lot. We tried to do state-of-the-art research that could really help the society, really, from utilities, regulators, regular people, work towards clean energy future. And so to me, my jam is when I found great collaborations and projects where we would be helping a technology provider get together with a utility company and maybe form stakeholder engagement groups of solar developers, customer advocate people. And we would hear everybody's perspective and try to make whatever problem we were trying to solve. In most cases, it was something related to integrating more renewables, make it better and more efficient and cost effective with everybody's perspective.
And so would you say that when you're doing that, when you're bringing groups together, are you looking at it more from DER integration kind of from the utility side, or is it more like the behind the meter type of a thing?
So we were looking at both, really. A lot of my projects and at my new company at Kevala, it's the same. It's about integrating those customer-sided resources and having the customer's perspective that has an economic stake in that resource that he has installed in the house, but how to manage it for the better and for the grid. And so I think utilities have also realized that now all of these resources are there. And while the philosophy used to be, well, let's just ignore them, have them not do anything with the grid, and we'll manage it. Now they're realizing, well, number one, they can do things. They can leverage, minimize their own impact. So we may need them, and we can actually control them to make the system more efficient. and be part of the solution that we're trying to solve. So I think you can't silo it anymore, because we are looking at a lot of technologies that are being cited and customer choice, but at the same time have to be planned and integrated by the utility companies. So that's why the two perspectives have to be there. And when you look at the impacts, well, you have to see how is it impacting the customer, and then how is it impacting the utility.
Yeah, totally. So you're looking for kind of the win-win situations across that edge between client, consumer, and utility. I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes. I haven't pulled this one out in a long time, but it's Guy Kawasaki, who was at Apple for a long time. And he said in one of his books, everything interesting happens at the edges. Mm-hmm. And to me, this is a really great example that you're sitting at this edge between, old school utilities who are in a very stable, reliability driven place, and consumers that have until recently, taken advantage of that stable, reliability-driven utility,
Totally.
but want to start to be players, want to start to own their own resources. And sitting at that edge, I think, is really interesting. I think from the work that I do, we always assume that like the utility is kind of a black box, and like your rate tariff's your rate tariff, and the incentive program is the incentive program, and it exists and it's out there, but there's no like communication across that line. And so then, we advocate for consumers and say, well, here's how you should do it given this condition. But you're actually creating conversations across that edge, right?
We're definitely trying that. And you said it very well. One of the things that I found in my last maybe 5 or 6 years is you were talking about that edge. And I've been saying where the technical meets the regulatory, it's a very exciting space for me, because it means that what we're doing is actually advancing some societal good, right? Ideally. And that's a lot of what I do now with Kavala, right? We are trying to inform as much as we can that space of regulators, utilities that have to keep the lights on, and customers that have choices now, and how to best inform it to provide the best plans for our infrastructure, for our rates. But it's not simple. I mean, the way we used to plan before was extremely simple set of assumptions. And now, just to even answer a question, you need to consider 12 other things times 10 other scenarios to actually understand, a little bit of the impact of what you're trying to look at. So it's a complex space now. And that excites me when we need to create new tools, data, think outside of the box into how we're going to think about this problem.
Yeah, I definitely think, complexity can feel scary or frustrating, but there's also a ton of opportunity in complexity.
That's exactly right. And now, we live in the data world, which has increased the complexity because we have it. But at the same time, you can use it to your advantage, right? And so it's more complex and more simple too, because we have the data. We're developing the ability to, look at many, many, many variables and many, big quantity of data. So.
Yeah. So, I love also that this is something you said at the very beginning, that when you're creating these conversations, you're bringing so many different kinds of people into the room. And I think that's something that we are really excited about here at PowerFlow, is bringing more voices to the whiteboard, more minds in the room, where decisions are made, where complexities are processed, so that you have the richness of perspective. And so you were talking about perspectives from all these different types of people, like consumers, regulators, policymakers, utilities, and suppliers, right? And so I'm curious to hear kind of what challenges or or exciting opportunities you've found in like creating those conversations. And I see them almost a lot of times as stovepipes. So you're starting to break down stovepipes, creating collaborative conversations between disciplines. How's that go?
Some of the lessons learned with those great experiences with bringing multiple people to the room is that at the end, whatever you end up proposing is going to work, and you avoid the working on something for a while, presenting it in front of somebody and everybody just not feeling included. And you can imagine, I mean, that would happen in a family or in any context, right? Where
humans.
Somebody has said something, humans, exactly.
Right.
And you haven't been included. And so at the same time, it is a tedious process. It takes time. It takes commitment. If you're not committed, then because you have to keep people engaged. But at the same time, I think that the results tend to be just way more successful because everybody sees their little piece in whatever ends up the end result, right? The developer says, well, that's my constraint. I didn't want to be curtailed more than that. I was included in that thing, and the customer or the utility, really could not accept some other constraint. And they are also have been part of that, result that you're presenting and so I think that, that's the best success story I have with them, including everybody's perspective.
Can you tell a story about, one of those conversations? Like how does that come to be?
I think one of my best stories was when I did work in Hawaii with a utility company, and we were trying to look at doing a study to understand what the inverters, so the inverter is the power electronic interface between the solar panels in your house and the grid. And that little white box actually has power electronics in there that can do some good things for the grid. So it can provide voltage support or frequency support. And so we did a first study where we actually modeled the grid up to the customer. So every house was included in the model. And we could actually tell what would be the impact of doing it one way or doing it the other way. And so those were the great, I think, little discussions where we had the inverter manufacturer's perspective of what they could do, what could be feasible, what could not be feasible, providing concerns. The developer's perspective, the person that sells that to the customer's perspective, that is at the end the one paying for the system. And then ultimately the utility that is going to be the one providing the power up to that. And it's going to impact then how they control the grid, because that little box now is going to be doing something that they have to consider in their models. And then ultimately the regulator that was approving the interconnection functions or settings that we were proposing. And so that was one of the great success stories where we included everybody's perspective. And at the end, when the report was published and the filing was submitted to the Public Utility Commission, I think there were no surprises. The regulators had been included all along, and everybody else had seen all of the results that were at the end presented. So that was a really good success story. It was also very nerve-wracking as a scientist, being in that world of not all technical folks. And I remember having this feeling of worried that, what we did when you do studies at the end is create a model the best you can with a long set of assumptions and a long set of sort of constraints, right? And you produce some results. And then those were taken out in the world and then used. The numbers were rolling around. And sometimes it was the first time I was exposed to I didn't say that. I said 2% under this set of assumptions and these conditions and that. But I didn't necessarily say that other thing, right? Or I can't guarantee. And so it was the first time I was exposed to, at the end, when you are doing very applied studies and informing policy, at the end, that's how it is, right? I mean, we need to make decisions today, and we can't model every single scenario to be perfectly 100% sure of what the decisions we're going to make, right? And so as coming more from the traditional academia and research world, it was a little bit nerve-wracking, but very exciting too.
I can totally imagine that. And I think that's another big edge, in technology in general. I won't just say like in the industry, in the energy industry, it's, the edge between academia and research and reality, and there's a clean, sometimes, I mean, obviously I'm not being dismissive of research, but like in research, we attempt to clean things up, like to find the places where we can simplify so that we can say something, knowledgeable, so that we can say something conclusive. But the real world is often so messy, right? And so making that transition is kind of it's definitely a jump. The thing that's in my mind is the cow is not a sphere, that in physics we tend to, have you ever heard that? Like you model a cow as a sphere?
I don't think so. But I can imagine.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So it's we joke around that like in physics, like if you're, often like when you're doing like a simple physics problem where you're like, what's the velocity and how much did the position change? And you're like, well, if you had a cow that was walking at a certain velocity, and it's like, well, just model the cow as a sphere and don't worry about the wind resistance on all of the different parts of the cow. Like it's just but that's an oversimplification. In the real world, the cow is a cow and it doesn't move at a constant velocity. It has hooves and it does all of this complicated stuff. And so, the way that we model things, and this is important for me as a modeler, the way that we model things is still just a model. It can tell us important things about reality, but it's never going to perfectly reflect reality, right?
That's right. But at the same time, we know that and we can live with that. And we have to still, go forward. I think one of the very exciting things, for example, to make the move to Kevala and the industry and the real world, as we were talking about it, is that there is a sense of urgency. I mean, climate change we have to do something, and we have to do something now. And it is very important, the decisions that we make this year and next year. It's not all about now thinking about 2050 and 20. Yes, that's because of that. But we have now, we really need to start making the best decisions for 2022 and 2023. Like we have to stop, just now doing plans 10 years, and in 10 years, we're going to do something. And I think that's why I was very excited also to make it to Kevala, where we are now sort of really informing many use cases, but a big one is the grid planning and how to plan for infrastructure, taking into account everything that is happening in the customer side, right? So, and we really do believe that the models may not be perfect and the data may not be perfect, but definitely we can move forward with some important forecasts that we need to take into account, and decisions have to be made and planning has to improve because, we really need to decarbonize this grid now. And being part of that is really exciting.
Right. You can't wait for it to be perfect. The time is now. Absolutely. I was going to ask you actually, now that you're making this transition from, even though there's a complicated structure of how NREL works, but let's call it the public sector, right? You're making this, it's public sector, it's government lab into, the private sector. Do you see a difference of approach? How is that different?
I think one of the big differences is the speed of things. And although we do, pretty efficient research, we do have timelines that are in the multi-year many times, projects and thinking and scoping. And right now, from what I can see, and I will caveat that I am going on week 3 at my new role at Kevala, we talk to clients and we deliver things in weeks. in less than 2 months, you can deliver incredible, very insightful analysis. And of course, the rhythm and the expectation is very different.
Definitely. So I'm curious just, about kind of the course of your career that has gotten you here. We've talked a lot about the present moment, which is awesome and what I really want to focus on. But tell me a little bit like how you got into this. I mean, your educational background, you've kind of been in energy from the beginning. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I actually started my bachelor's in physics. I switched to engineering, and that was the first switch where I understood, well, physics, math is great, but I am actually very excited about applying this to society, which is, could be one of the definitions of engineering. So when I was doing my bachelor's in technical mining, in Spain, electrical engineering is taught in mining engineering and industrial engineering. And so I was introduced, and I did the specialty in the last year to generation, transmission, and distribution of electricity. And to me, it was a mind-blowing moment when they told me that the grid is an interconnected system and that generation had to match load at all times. That was my aha moment. I was mind blown by that infrastructure that I had no idea it even existed, and we take it completely for granted in our houses. And so,
Totally.
I had never thought the fact that I turn things on and off, and there's operators and power plants having to do things because of our commodity. And it is taken totally, or comfort would be a better word in English, I think. And it is taken for granted, right? We don't think about scheduling anything. And so when I was introduced to that, I was like, this is amazing. And so then I came to the US to finish actually my senior project design at School of Mines. And I met my advisor for my master's degree and decided to stay, and did. That's when I got really into power systems, and I was really interested in just learning more about this, transmission and distribution of power. And NREL was always my dream job because I did my master's at Colorado School of Mines, and I, was a big fan of all of the reports and the people, the big minds. I call them like mini research entities, the people at NREL. They're just like, their own little, very powerful mind. And it was really a great place to grow and learn and expand in all senses, in the technical, but also in this other, soft skills where you learn from people leading projects, leading engagements with clients. And so I was involved in many things, and that was a really great experience. And now I'm off to my new adventure with Kavala, and it's very exciting to bring all of that background.
It is very exciting. Oh, thanks for sharing your story. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to talk with Dr. Giraldez about her view of the future and where we need to, how we respond now. Don't miss it. Back with the Power Flow podcast. Today, we are talking to Dr. Julieta Giraldez, who is Principal of Customer Solutions at Kavala, working at the edge, at the intersection between consumers and grid, looking for win-win situations. And Julieta, you had talked at the beginning of our conversation about, or in the middle, I guess, of the climate change is now thing. And I think there is a sense of urgency that's not just in the energy sector, not just in the professional community, but it's starting to catch on, like in the broader community, the laymen, the consumers who are saying, oh, wait, like all of a sudden I do notice the changes in the weather. All of a sudden I do notice that this drought condition in the Southwest is ridiculous. And so I think I agree with you about this sort of realizing that the decisions we make today are important, not just the goal for 2050. So kind of from that frame and from your role as a connector and facilitator of conversations, what are you seeing as the biggest challenges standing between us and that 2050 clean energy future?
Great. Well, that is a big question. And I must say that there's probably many angles we could take, but I have been focused in that edge. And so I think I'm going to keep talking about that, right? I think one of the big challenges, as we were saying before, is that we need many different stakeholders involved and providing inputs to actually interact with this power grid to make it cleaner, right? And so the data information that we need for that, the platforms and the analysis is very complicated and complex, as I was saying before. And to now understand, well, what if we do this? What if we do that? Is not as simple as it used to be before. I mean, now a utility, they used to think about, well, should they change this capacitor in a distribution system or should they upgrade a line? Now it's about incentive programs that you can create for customer choice, that is regulatory, that is the utility. They can own things or they can incentivize it. So you have to rethink about what do you want the shape to look like so that I can actually have the best clean system to provide it, right, and to distribute it. And then all kinds of new software technologies. It's not just about planning. Then we have to operate this in the best way. And then ideally enabling a more, maybe the word could be like the democratization of energy, so more participation in the choices, but then the services that you can also provide that are needed, right? Now, before, they didn't used to be this thinking of like, well, you have to define your services to actually request them. And that didn't even happen before, right? They just managed the best they could. And, if there was an outage, somebody called and said, well, my lights are not on, and then we'll just go check how it works. And it's just not, it's a paradigm change into including all of that grid edge that was completely ignored because we didn't need to before, to include it in our planning and operations. So I think it's a big challenge to really, one of the biggest challenges I think is all of the data needed, and then the probably data privacy concerns and limitations that I am actually still actively learning about. Well, we still need to make this a safe system from a cybersecurity perspective, from the utility, but from the customer perspective. So that is a big, I think, component to it too.
Great. We got so much in there to unpack. So we've got like more options, right? There's more options for solutions to things. There's more options to make things work better. I think you said it, in the beginning of like, how can we create win-win situations? You've got more equipment sitting out there, behind the meter, certainly behind the meter, and saying like, wow, this could actually help the grid. So the grid has more options, but that creates complexity, right? And challenge. And so then secondly, we've got more participation and, so more people involved, more voices involved, more desires for services. And that's more complexity. So it's funny because it's one of those answers that and then we've got number 3, I got more data, right? And just how to manage that data, who it belongs to, how to protect it, how to wade through all of that data. So I feel like this is one of those things that like, they're challenges, but they're also positive things. Would you agree with that? That like, it's good to have more options and more participation.
That's right. That's right. And ultimately, I think one of my big interests in this question is that I do believe that making so that renewable energy and electrification of transportation, for example, can be part of the solution if they are, included. And working towards that decarbonization is possible. So it's not all about just now people wanting to be included in the energy grid. It's just that it is really a key part of the solution to decarbonize it. And so, again, when the utility before would have just the choice of upgrading a line or installing a new capacitor, which was all their equipment, well, now it's complex. They have to describe the problem they have. They have to open it up in a safe way for bidders from the outside that say, well, I have a solution. I thought of putting this big, plant with a storage, or way more complex ones. I'm going to design a program where I'm going to control 100 houses and I'm going to resolve your constraint. And of course, all of these technologies at the same time are very new, and it's sort of state of the art what we're doing. And so I understand that there is a concern also of maybe doing things too fast, or putting technologies that may be putting us at risk. But at the same time, it is a huge opportunity, and I feel like industry has been ready in the last 10, 15 years to provide these solutions. For example, at NREL before, we used to test them, and we have now the methods to sort of make utilities more comfortable with deploying these technologies in the real world. And so, yeah, I think we have a sense from the industry now that I had seen before at NREL, now I see at Kavala, that we're ready to provide these solutions. We just need the opportunity and to find those great project situations where we can get everybody involved and show it.
That's awesome. That's very exciting. I loved what you said there about like transportation. I think I have joked, well, at the beginning of the podcast, I made a big like hyperbolic statement that energy touches everything. And I was like, oh, I overstate. Da, da, da.
Yes.
And then I'm like, no, actually though, it's true. And I think that's part of this transition, right? That we're coming out of this. It's stovepiped. I keep using that word, but like there's these sort of artificial system boundaries where like, well, there's the electricity grid, and then what you do with the electricity is sort of up to you. And similarly to like fossil fuels, like, well, we have fossil fuel refineries, and then what we do with that is up to us. And then, it gets put in cars, or it gets you heat your house, and I think what we're seeing with these edges is a transition from realizing that those things don't happen in a vacuum. That if you have transportation, storage, and charging infrastructure, the way that plays with the utility grid is important, and it can affect the way other people are using electricity on site to run manufacturing. And that has an effect on the way people are using energy elsewhere for heating and cooling. And we have to think about it as a total system, expanding the boundaries of the system. And hey, as a PhD in systems engineering, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
That's exactly right. And the other reason, I mentioned that things were getting more complex, right? And that's when you understand systems engineering, it's a system of systems. And that's exactly what we're dealing with right now, right? Now we can't just plan our clean grid considering load like we did before. And then we said, okay, well, maybe let's consider a little bit of solar since it's coming. And now we need to consider transportation electrification. It's going to be a huge, I think it's a big impact, but it's a big opportunity. it's load, it consumes, and it's flexible, and it can also store. And so, just having worked so many years just in the integration of solar in the distribution system and understanding that, well, solar during the day, it's when it shines, but we're not home. And so utilities have to manage that sort of times where, it's going to be exporting. But now if you really think about, okay, the policies that are going now in states for transportation electrification are very ambitious, and they are an amazing opportunity for grid planning. And again, I think that the sense of urgency that I was mentioning with climate change is also not to miss those opportunities. I think that's my big thing, and why I'm very excited to be at Kavala right now. Is like, we can't miss the opportunity to next year consider how many more cars we're going to have, how they can be part of, how they're going to be integrated in this grid. And the fact that now we have to know where they're going to be, where they're going to be charging, and what their patterns are going to be. And that has to be, again, data. We need that data, and we need to include it in forecasts to better accommodate that and not miss the opportunity of, maybe spending some money that we thought to solve an issue that could be actually solved by just counting that we're going to have cars now that are going to consume electricity.
Electric vehicle charging is one of those things, and I think it's a microcosm of a larger thing here, is that it is data. We do need the data, but it's also not just about data. It's a shift of mindset to thinking about things so deterministically, because with electric vehicle charging, as an example, there's a behavioral pattern with it too. How do people use their electric vehicles? And I think that's something that you're bringing up here kind of throughout the conversation as well, even, talking about bringing in human perspectives into conversation, that there's a certain amount that we have that is technical, that is data driven, that we can model in data. But then there's also the perspective, the human perspective. How is it used? How can we get around that? How do we protect for that? How do we allow for human variation, which is, I think, kind of a shift of mindset, especially for us technologists.
Definitely. And we started to acknowledge that at NREL before I left. And at Kavala, we realized that is going to be very important, especially also on the load side. Believe it or not, at the end, it is more constraint, right? It is constrained to a location. And so although the patterns and, can change, there's quite a bit of experience and techniques into how to understand that diversity, low diversity, and usage patterns and all of that. But with electricity, I think that's the very exciting thing. And as you say, is that we have to account for all of this randomness in location and usage pattern. But I think there's also greater opportunity to drive that pattern, greater than at a home, because it can be more, it is just one appliance, if you want to think about it that way, right? And so it depends less on all of the other things, and even comfort levels are easier to measure, right? Okay, you have to leave by one time or you have to be done by another. But there is I think a better opportunity to do fleet management or, controlling what those patterns are going to look like with transportation than with usage patterns in a house, for example.
Oh, no, I really love that perspective, actually, that I think sometimes with the behavioral aspects of all of this, we throw up our hands and say, well, I don't know, they could do anything. People could come in and do anything. And I love that observation that we do have an opportunity to perhaps drive behavioral change. And with these opportunities to change the way that we kind of do the grid and do transportation and do behind the meter resources, we have the opportunity to say, like, hey, here's how we should do it as a community. And here's how here's how we should set it up and set up boundaries on the system so that people are inclined to behave in certain ways. I like that opportunity to drive the behavioral patterns and so make it less of a random variable. I like that. So from here, given the challenges and also opportunities that more options, more participation, and more data present, what are the next right steps for us as a sector? What should we be doing to create the clean energy future? What can we do in the now to set us up for those 2050 and beyond goals?
Yeah, well, I think some of the things that a lot of, there's already a lot of initiatives and the private sector has taken is to measure it, right? Like with everything. I heard a great a documentary, by the way, Picture a Scientist. It has nothing to do with what we're talking, but it does have to do with women in engineering and science. And one of the professors in the movie, she says, well, just like to anything that I've done in the past, she's a scientist, data and accountability and budgets are needed, right? To measure the progress of something, right? And so whether you're talking about how well your measures for diversity are doing, or in this case, for a clean energy future, I think, we really believe, for example, at my new company, that we can create metrics around carbon that are extremely localized and that can inform also things like energy justice. And so we need to start really coming up with goals that are measurable from one year to another, not in 50 years, that we can show that everybody and the actors involved in these plans, that as a society, we have policy goals and things we vote on that we want, well, really be able to measure them and make sure they are being done in an equitable way. And so one of the, I think, great initiatives that we're going to be working on is carbon footprint and carbon accounting, really doing it at the neighborhood level, at the house level, to start really understanding, again, the information is there if we want to, the power of using all of that data, start really measuring how we are doing and what is needed to really be a decarbonized society in a few years.
Wow. Yes, definitely. Making it more understandable, making it more locally impactful, because I think, there's a general understanding of what carbon footprint means, but it's still at this big, huge 10,000 foot level. And you can wave your hands around and say, I think that affects my carbon footprint. But really how do your actions as an individual or as a local community really affect carbon footprint and really affect metrics here at home, of air quality? And we were having this conversation actually with our kids. So we recently got a fully electric vehicle here. And so it's been a great experiment and the kids love it. And one of our kids very rightly brought up that doesn't part of our grid power that we're using to charge the car come from coal? And she's not wrong. It does. And, we talked about some of the nuances, conversations that large scale coal plants are generally more efficient than your individual internal combustion engine. And there are some things like that. But we also talked about the fact that we're kind of offsetting emissions from our local neighborhood where we drive our electric vehicle and have a zero emissions vehicle. And we basically put those emissions down where the coal plant is.
Exactly. So if you could see that, can you imagine being able to see that in a map, in a tool that actually you do that change, and it would account to, imagine 10 people in your neighborhood do that, and you can suddenly see how much greener or redder your neighborhood is.
Right.
Because of
Yeah. And I love, these are hard conversations, as a parent, to say, we think we're doing good. Is it good? It's probably good, net good. But we have to be aware of the impacts we're causing in other places. And I think that's another thing about, this next generation has more of a global perspective, can see beyond themselves. But yeah, I really love the idea, right, of being able to see it on a map, being able to see how it's affecting the local neighborhood, and then maybe how the local neighborhood fits into the larger network. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and at the end, humans, we don't do very good with data until it doesn't affect us, right? You could see it with COVID. It was very hard. I knew COVID was there, but until you don't sort of control your mind to say, no, you have to act this way, it is definitely not your automatic response until it doesn't affect you, right? It's very hard for humans to comprehend. And it's the same. We know things are going on, but until it doesn't affect us and we see how we can actually, or we understand how we can actually make a difference, is that you don't really react and respond. And so I think that that part, I think, of the information that, of course, has been, a huge change in our society, how much more information we have now, but making it usable and accountable so we can measure it, I think it's going to be very important.
Yeah, and seeing how you as an individual can make an impact is inspiring. Like that starts a positive feedback loop of like, wow, I can make a difference. I see how my difference can change the data. Like that's real impact. And that inspires me to do more, to keep it up, to be consistent, because I know I'm having an impact. I think that's the future we all wish for, where we know we want to do good. We know we want to have impact, but being able to really say, I know that this is the way that I can make impact. I think so many people are hungry for that. Do you have any final thoughts on anything we've talked about to share? What's your kind of main message, if you could share one thing with our listeners?
I think our main message, my main message would be, if we really want this clean energy future, we have to really understand, and I'm doing I'm trying to do my part with other things that are not part of my daily job, right? We need to understand how things work to really, right? To really understand how, well, things that are comfort or that we may have been used to for a long time are now part of a problem. And one of my biggest that I'm just not sure what I'm going to be able to do about it. But for example, flying, right? I live in the US, and part of my, I would say, quality of life or being able to be happy here is that I can fly to Spain every once in a while. I love to travel the world. And so start understanding everything, how is that, having an impact, and how I may need to change or rethink the way I spend time abroad, and maybe do it in longer periods, but less time, or I don't know, so that we can all, but at the end, it does affect the clean energy future and the climate crisis. And so it's very interesting just to take a perspective on everything and keep learning as much as we can from all the sectors.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a wonderful conversation, Julieta. I'm so glad that we got to do this.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. It was lovely to be here.
If any of our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
I would love to be contacted. I can share my email information, which is my first last name at kavala.com. And yeah, I would love to receive any questions or keep the conversation going on anything we talked about or any new ideas.
That's what it's about. It's about creating conversations. Well, thank you, listeners, for spending your time with us. We do not take it lightly. We're so glad that you are here to share in collaborative conversation and collaborative ideation. And we will look forward to seeing you back here next time at the whiteboard.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Power Flow podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share the episode with other innovators, leave us a positive review, and subscribe to Power Flow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find show notes for this episode, more great conversations, PowerFlow merchandise, and more at powerflowpodcast.com. PowerFlow is hosted by Amy Simpkins, produced by Devin Shonchuk, and managed by Laura Novak. See you next time here at the whiteboard.